For those of you who don't know the UC Berkeley Labor Center, well, we've been around for 60 years, created to be the outreach arm of the university to work with labor in California with a clear understanding that having strong, effective functioning unions, worker organizations in the state of California is a public good. And in that context, we do training programs for unions, worker organizations, and that's branched out into tenants unions. We have experiential learning programs for students, and we do research on a wide range of labor and employment topics that are important to workers in the state of California. And one of the programs we've had for the last couple of years is a Practitioner-In-Residence program, where we've supported people who are have been doing work in the field to give them a chance to take a year and to really think about and address a problem that they've been working on, to both do some research, do some writing, and then prepare for where they want to take that work going forward. And it's really been fantastic for us to have Brad Hirn as part of that group. And I saw Jazz Brisick in the room somewhere over there, who is also one of our practitioner-in-residences right now. And so to get the program started, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Bahar Tashbash.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Okay, amazing. Hi, my name is Bahar, and I work on the student engagement team at the Berkeley Labor Center, and I'm a member of UAW 4811. With a few folks in this room, raise your hand if you remember. Right on, hi. Much of Brad's work, I'm really excited to welcome you all into this space alongside Ken and introduce our speaker and panel moderator, Brad Hirn. Much of Brad's work in the past decade has been focused on organizing with tenants living under large corporate landlords, including the Veritas Tenant Association, VTA, the statewide tenant union for renters living in buildings operated by one of California's largest landlords, Veritas Investments. Together with the VTA members, Brad helped pass the landmark Union at Home Ordinance in San Francisco, the country's first legal framework for extending collective bargaining rights to private market tenants. When Brad asked me to introduce him, he was like, "You really don't have to share too much about me," which was confusing advice because that is exactly what an introduction is. I guess because he's an organizer who builds unions all over the damn place, at home and at work, I'm certain it is Brad's intention with this event that folks leave the space thinking, wow, I really want to help organize tenant unions. So one, if you're a student and you're interested in getting involved in tenant, labor, and community organizing, please come talk to me after. I have a folder full of cool opportunities coming up in October. Two, there is so much knowledge and experience right now, right here in this room. So if folks could just turn to a person next to them that they don't know, you're only gonna have 1 minute, so don't make me regret this. Turn to someone you don't know and introduce yourself and your name, your pronouns, your union if you have one, and why you're here. Go. Did someone want to share? Did I miss something? Okay, great. Before I pass it to Brad, I'd like to acknowledge that even though Brad is only in residence at the Labor Center for a year, he has already helped move our union in the right direction by serving as unit chair for Berkeley academic researchers in UAW 4811. I'm pretty sure Brad carries no shortcuts with him at all times. And he once, this kind of sounded like a wedding toast, sorry. And he once said to me, and I quote, "I will stand by Jane's life as a structure test slide for the rest of my life." Brad is in it for the long haul, and his work continues to make our movement stronger, to demand and embody the world we deserve. Please welcome tenant and labor organizer Brad Hirn.
Hi everyone.
Hello.
How are you all?
Great.
Strange being up here.
You got this.
So thank you, Bahar, and thank you, Ken. It's a real honor to do this tonight, just a few days before my partner and I drive to Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm really grateful to the Labor Center for the opportunity to do a residency. I did not, as an organizer, I did not think I would get that kind of opportunity, to be honest, and it's afforded me the chance to think through 8 years of campaign work and prepare for a transition back to where I grew up in the Midwest, Ohio, specifically Cincinnati, which is a majority renter city, 62%, with some of the fastest rising rents in the country. You know, I want to just first also say, organizers, like I said, we don't often get the chance to reflect, especially new, emerging, aspiring, frontline organizers don't get enough opportunities to write, research, make meaning of their campaign work. And that's a loss for all of us. And if we're concerned about organizer burnout, we should be investing in them early and often, so they want to stay as organizers. I want to acknowledge my partner, Megan, right here next to you guys. Who knows just when to record me when I'm going on about finance capital, because that could be some excellent material for an article or this talk. So thank you. So this talk is a version of an article or series of articles that I've been working on in my residency, and I'm going to go through 3 major parts over the next 10 minutes or so. And
Sorry,
then we'll...
can you put the microphone closer to yourself?
Yes.
Kind of.
How's that?
Oh, perfect.
Thank you. So I'm going to go through these kind of 3 major parts over the next 10 minutes or so, and then we'll get to the amazing panelists who are here. The first is the position of being a tenant in today's economy, dominated as it is by individuals and companies who make immense profit from property and investments. These rentiers, they don't produce anything. And for easy reference, I'm going to refer to this group of individuals and companies tonight as finance capital. So when you hear that term, that's what I'm talking about. And so then rent and mortgages become choke points in this kind of political economy. And we're going to come back to that. The second part is a theory of power for organizing against finance capital, centering tenants as a class, what I call the renting class. And third, strikes. Rent strikes, debt strikes, the ultimate structure test, in Jane McAlevy's words. the ultimate structure test for a tenant union, for a labor union, and one that tenant unions have deployed in this country to win things that many of us may take for granted now. And we'll see some examples of that from the past and also hear from some examples of that today. So the first part, we often call housing an issue for poor and working class people. When working conditions are an issue or low pay is an issue, many of us in this room would ask, do you have a union? No? Well, you should organize one. But when living conditions are an issue, or the rent is too high, it suddenly becomes more complicated for some reason. And I hear people in our movements, who have been in our movements for years, labor and tenant, forget how to cut an issue, how to analyze power, and how to call a fight between two competing sides, one who owns and one who doesn't, what it is: class struggle. So this is a question of power and control. A person who rents their home, they don't own the space, but they make it their own. They make memory there. They raise kids, they have celebrations, they grieve. They go through their daily lives. Landlords seek to standardize and homogenize these diverse relationships, turn them into something that can be easily counted, made for income, made for profit. And if you're a real estate investment firm, if you have figured out how to turn rent into a tradable financial product, then you've also changed the terrain of class struggle from the workplace to the home. We have 44 million households in this country who rent, and that number has only gone up since 1980. That rise in renting class households is no accident. Housing, and increasingly rental housing, are amazing collateral for financial products. Cedric Duran, who wrote a book called Fictitious Capital, something I had the chance to read in my residency, says, and I quote, "It is the rise of fictitious capital that helps explain how an economy with sluggish investment in real things also presides over massive wealth creation, polarization, and inequality," end quote. Tenants live in the places that finance capital is banking on for profit. They live in the places that finance capital sees as collateral for their financial products. They need something that's fixed, real, that's concrete. But they see our homes and they see our lives at home. And they see all the memories we make. And they turn it into something homogeneous and standardized, and then they sell it as securities. They pay it out as dividends. And none of that would be possible without our rent. Part 2, power. Tenants are uniquely positioned because they live in these places where finance capital is trying to extract profit. But it does look different than a workplace. Are renting class people the primary source of leverage in their own salvation? Or are we looking to lawyers, policymakers, politicians, planners, developers, everyone except tenants? Most people working on housing don't have a theory of power. In the housing world, we hear about the 3 Ps: production, preservation, protection. No power. A lot of us in the tenant movement, to be honest, lack a theory of power because we may not actually think tenants have power. Really well-trained staff, researchers, comms people working on this issue, coming at it from all sides, coming up with neat slogans, all the while treating tenants as passive recipients who need protection. Tenants are hardly involved. They're victims or recipients. They are not subjects. They don't have agency. And yet those tenants, through their rental payments, are creating wealth for an entire sector of the US economy, and we should be acting like renters do that. We should be acting like renters provide a third of California's property tax base, because they do. We should be acting like renters inhabit a strategic position in this country and in this economy, because they do. And we should be acting like renting class people exist at a choke point in our financialized economy, because they do. It's not that being a worker is unimportant, or that workers are unimportant, or that workplace organizing is unimportant. It's that the capitalist and property owning classes made pivots going back to 1980, and we're too far behind. The housing crisis is a crisis of affordability, and that means we're talking about profit and power. And as Jane would say, high participation is a prerequisite for power. So we're talking about big tenant unions with majorities in their apartment buildings and on their blocks. The labor movement, and I count myself as a proud member of the labor movement, by and large, the labor movement doesn't have a coherent theory of power that will keep its members living close to where they work. Pockets of the tenant movement in this country have a theory of power, but pockets do not make an outfit. So then why is the labor movement not organized tenants? Why is the labor movement not organizing its own members where they live? Is it because there's no Wagner Act, no National Labor Relations Act for being a renter? Although there might be soon, as we'll hear. Is it because we don't know how to fight finance capital? Hell, we barely understand it, and it doesn't fit our conventional understanding of unionization. How do you unionize finance capital? Answer: a strike-ready tenant union whose members pay rents to a real estate investment trust, or REIT, like a lot of these companies are, relies on the same tested methods that the most effective labor organizers have utilized in this country since the formation of the Congress of Industrial Organizations in the 30s, and the strikes that shook steel, auto, and coal. But if we don't start treating tenants as a class, as renting class people, if we don't start treating this as a class struggle, then we'll yell past each other about supply, which at this point our opposition largely controls, and we'll think we must have missed that one policy brief that gave us the answer. Labor and tenant movements have made the same mistake for the last few decades: turn away from the workers, turn away from the tenants. Power is what tenants need, and there is one way for renting class people to build power, and that's organizing themselves and their neighbors into strike-ready tenant unions to create the kind of crisis that they have, and only they have, the ability to create. So, to close, let's end with that ability to create a crisis and win. Rent strikes have won a lot of things that we take for granted, just like strikes by workers have. So we're going to go through some quick slides before we go to our panel. This is from the VTA, a march in 2019. The march that rolled back rents at 532 households in 34 buildings in SF, that led then the largest landlord in San Francisco, Veritas, to stop passing on rent increases in the form of debt service. You know, there's a lot of talk right now about social housing. This is in Vienna. I am going to say that any strategy to reach social housing in this country, we can't do it in the shadow of companies like this. We can't do it in the shadow of Blackstone, Essex, all of these companies on the private real estate market. Let's go back in time for a second. Pauline Newman, 1907, 10,000 strikers. Laid the groundwork for the International Lady Garment Workers Union, mapping out networks of housewives to launch garment strikes. 1918, 1920, New York City. The first rent control laws in this country came through strikes. This also from New York City. Tenants back then connecting a reduction, their decrease in wages to then demanding a decrease in rent. Chicago, 1920. Thousands of families on rent strike, 10,000 strong, win the passage of an ordinance to make sure the heat is on in the winter. A theme here, women, in particular women of color, leading these strikes. Harlem, 1963, 1964, rent strikes to fight for a dignified space in affordable housing. 1966, public housing rent strike, San Francisco, Potrero Hill, to get public financing for repairs that should have been done a long time ago. 1969, Gene King, St. Louis. A rent strike that inspired the 30% income standard. That standard that we take for granted, it's because they won 25% through a strike. $4.5 million withheld in today's dollars during that strike. Oakland, 2022, rent strike ends with a building sale to the Oakland Community Land Trust. 434 Leavenworth Street, San Francisco's Tenderloin, a rent strike by Spanish-speaking, Chinese, and Vietnamese tenants leads to the first legally binding contract on language access protocols. The Village, Albany, California, UC Housing, debt strike, withholding payments on new parking fees, getting UC, and we'll hear from Chris here in a minute, getting UC to pull out, to find $420,000. 14th Street, 320 14th Street, San Francisco, California. We'll hear from Sandra in a second. But a one-year strike that not only got the landlord to waive hundreds of thousands of dollars, but that building is going to the San Francisco Land Trust and rents are going down. And from Twitter, Tara Raghuveer, who leads, or is an organizer, I should say, with the Kansas City Tenants Union, KC Tenants. They started a tenant union federation, 5 tenant unions around the country. And this is what they're preparing for. So I want to now welcome our panelists to the front to continue this conversation. So we've got, come back to that. Oops. Okay. All right, I want to welcome Chris, Lee, Sandra, and Kat. I'm just going to quickly introduce our panel here.
Thanks, Lynn.
So first, it's a real pleasure to see Lee again. This is Lee Hepner, California-based antitrust lawyer and currently senior legal counsel for the American Economic Liberties Project. I didn't know you were a lawyer until you got this new job.
Don't tell anyone.
I met Lee when he was legislative aide to then Supervisor Aaron Peskin on the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco, who sponsored the Union at Home ordinance in SF, and had the pleasure to work with Lee on that. Chris Lubunau, who I met just a few months ago, resident at University Village in Albany, California, grad student in social work, had some other hats at the time, which I'll let her get into, and now a UAW 4811 member who was one of the leaders on the strike at University Village. Kat, who I just had the pleasure of meeting today, 27 years of work as a groundskeeper at UC Berkeley. Held a number of positions in their union, AFSCME 3299, on the member action team, the bargaining team, and is on the executive board of 3299. Which is in a tough contract. And then finally, Sandra Martinez, founding member of the tenant union at 320 14th Street in San Francisco. A natural leader, if I've ever identified one correctly. So we're going to start with you, Sandra. I'm going to help with the mic for a second. Does anyone need a headset for Spanish?
Do you want to make the announcement again?
Sure. So if you are not bilingual in English-Spanish, then please come up to our great interpreters here and grab a headset.
You want to speak Espanol? Those people are not going to understand English.
All right. Sandra,
Hi, Brad.
you helped form your building's tenant union a couple years ago, and almost all of the tenants in your building are members of your tenant union. When you decided to go on strike on June 1st of 2023, how did you know that you and your neighbors were prepared?
Primero que nada, buenas tardes. Yo me di cuenta que podíamos dar un paso más allá de lo que se había logrado a una huelga de renta, porque habíamos tomado acciones de diferentes maneras y por parte de Veritas no habíamos sido escuchados. Las acciones que hicimos fueron poner pósters en nuestras puertas, stickers en las ventanas, y no fuimos escuchados por parte de Veritas. Entonces tomamos la acción de hacer una marcha por la calle hasta llegar a las oficinas de Veritas y tampoco pudimos lograr nada. Entonces hicimos otra marcha, pero enfrente de la...
Kat, what is the significance of this demand for you and your coworkers?
Thank you. So, we recently took a survey of all our members, and that's over 30,000 members, and we asked them what was their housing issues. And within an hour, we got over 100 of surveys back, and everything that came back was struggling with housing. And that's a big problem. We have a member right here at Berkeley that makes a fair wages according to the federal standards. That recently his rent went up, double. So he couldn't afford to live there anymore. So he's trying to find somewhere else to live. I'm gonna try to take it slow so she can keep up. He looked and looked and looked, but because first and last month's rent, deposit, he couldn't afford to find housing. So right now, our member is living in this car to work here at Berkeley. We have another member that's in UCLA. He works and he picks up extra shifts for his housing. The rent went up by an apartment that's owned by Blackstone. The rent went up so high that he can't afford to stay there anymore. So he ended up going into a shelter. Because he had to end up going into a shelter, he lost custody of his daughter. So many similar stories that a lot of our single parents that work for the University of California have to move back in with their elderly parents to have a roof over their kids' head and theirs. It's so many stories like myself. I work right here at Berkeley National Laboratory, but I couldn't afford the rent here anymore, so I had to move to Stockton. I drive 80 miles one way, 160 miles round trip, just to come to work. Almost $500 in gas a month, because I can't afford to live while I work. So that's one of our core demands that we're putting on the table.
Chris, speaking of UC as a landlord, Chris, you're a tenant at University Village in Albany, California. That's UC Berkeley's family housing complex. For many of you at the Village, the university is both your employer and your landlord. What is that like?
Well, the university is not only our employer and our landlord, but they are also our healthcare providers and our education provider. And what that's like is that it puts me and other residents at the Village in a hard place because UC holds a lot of power over our living conditions and dictates many aspects of our lives.
We're going to come back to that. Lee, during your service as a legislative aide to San Francisco Supervisor Aaron Peskin, you were the supervisor's lead on the Union Home Ordinance. At the time, what events were inspiring you to work on a collective bargaining framework for private market tenants?
Thanks for having me, Brad. That project was a real passion project of mine. I cut my teeth 10, 15 years ago protesting in the streets against the evictions of people like Jeremy Michaels, who was a senior living with AIDS in the Castro, who was losing his housing. And I followed that thread, and you start to realize how a lot of the common problems that we were observing were the coordination of capital interests and the financialization of housing. And you saw that capital was organizing in a way, but at the same time, we had this really rich environment of tenants advocates who were organizing as well. And 20 years ago, San Francisco had passed a law protecting the rights of tenants to put leaflets in the common areas of their buildings. Incredibly, a law like that was needed. But we were seeing at the time that we were contemplating this tenancy unit home legislation that tenant organizers like Lena Maybaum we're looking at were being harassed for very similar behavior. for knocking on the doors of tenants, for informing tenants about the rights that they have in their building. Hi, Debbie Nunez, you were one of those people as well. And it really kind of grew out of the organic organizing work that was being done by tenants who were recognizing this problem and feeling the need to organize as well. And we really had a good bully. Veritas was the company that in some manner or another, even though they denied being an owner, had a hand in some 265 buildings, not 265 apartments, those are buildings worth some $3 billion in San Francisco. And we're using that power to create new problems for tenants, harassing long-term rent-controlled tenants. And so we really approached the tenants union at home legislation from the perspective of what labor unions had been doing for a long time in this country, which is organizing for dignity in the workplace. And why shouldn't renters have that same dignity and respect in the most sacred space of all, which is where you live, where you sleep, your home. And so we approached it that way, and it kind of grew out of the organizing that you yourself and many in this room were already doing.
Thank you, Lee. So I'm going to turn to Chris. So you and your neighbors, Chris, at University Village recently won $420,000 from the university to help cover new parking fees. The fee taken annually went from $768 a year to $188. That's a 75% reduction, and you all did it in less than 4 months. So tell us how.
Wow. Thank you. It was alongside phenomenal village organizers like Christy Fishel and Anel Melkonian, who is here today. Hey, girl. We worked really hard to build trust within our community and provided opportunities for a non-traditional way to protest, one that centered in rest, play, and connection. We hosted free, family welcoming community events that uplifted the identities of residents who lived at University Village, like the Family Splash event, the World Market Fair, and the first ever Pride Parade protest in the city of Albany. All the while bringing opportunities for residents to come together, to care and cook for each other, and see how each of the families were showing resilience. It was by strengthening our relationships with our community and celebrating the communities we were part of that we were able to engage residents in a series of structure tests. Structure tests are many campaigns designed to measure our unity and participation as villagers at University Village. These tests included activities like signing petitions, posting up door signs similar to my friend over here, and delivering letters to UC, drafting press releases and media releases, mass flyer distribution, and knocking on doors. This was our way of assessing our collective strength by involving residents in direct action and reinforcing our collective frustration through public awareness flyer campaigns over UC's unfair imposition of parking fees on July 1st. By that date, we had mobilized over 300 residents who were prepared to take a stand. Together, we held the line by refusing to pay the fees, compelling UC to come to the negotiating table in good faith, and through the sustained pressure, we pushed UC to find $420,000 that was already available, proving the power of collective action and forcing change.
To you, Kat. So when you're talking with a coworker about this demand around Blackstone and housing demands generally, and you're talking to a coworker who is skeptical or doubtful, what does your organizing conversation look like?
So the good thing is, most of the members know what we're up against. Some of the members don't, because it's scary for them, because this is the first time that we're putting housing on the bargaining table. So my conversation to them is actually facts. It's facts that what we're asking for is not unreachable. Because we already know that they gave their CEO and their upper management and their executives these low interest rate loans. So when I talk to them, it's like we deserve it because there's too many of us, not just me. I'm quite sure you guys know co-workers, friends, family members that's living in their cars because the rent is just too damn high. So it's not hard really to talk to them because they already feel what a lot of us feel.
Thank you. And Sandra, next for you. Sandra, you, your husband, and your children, and there's Luis is here tonight, my other kids. Your family participated in many actions to support your strike. Like you said, you put a union sign on your apartment door, you attended the protests, the picket lines, you attended all the negotiation sessions, and prepared yourself to speak at them. And you were also able to motivate your neighbors to participate. What made you decide to dedicate your time and ability to your tenants union?
Pienso que, como les comentaba a Brad, no nos dimos cuenta cuando habíamos hecho las cosas, simplemente creo que con los vecinos nos funcionó muy bien la comunicación, lo que sucedía en el edificio, tanto ellos como nosotros nos comunicábamos. Entonces, eso nos motivó a mí y a mi esposo a apoyar, a hablar con los vecinos la situación que el edificio y el dueño en ese entonces, Verita, sucedía. Y creo que como todas las personas tenemos miedo a tomar una acción mayor, a pensar que nos vamos a enfrentar a un propietario tan grande como lo que es Veritas. Entonces, creo que eso fue lo que a nosotros nos motivó como hogar, como vecinos, a apoyarnos, a comunicarnos y saber qué era lo que estaba sucediendo con todos. Logramos confianza, nosotros con ellos, ellos con nosotros, los vecinos confiaban en nosotros, confiaban en lo que a veces mi esposo Luis les decía. Entonces ellos sentían la confianza en nosotros, nosotros en ellos y nosotros en la organización, que los pasos que estábamos haciendo, algo teníamos que sacar, algo bueno tenía que suceder y principalmente no tener miedo a lo que estábamos haciendo.
We're going to stay on you, Sandra, for another question, if that's okay. You and most of your neighbors were on rent strike for an entire year. You began your strike on June 1st, 2023 under Veritas, and you ended your strike with a different owner named the Prado Group. Sandra, what did you and your neighbors win?
Creo que con la huelga de venta lo primero que ganamos fue que Veritas nos reconociera como una organización que estábamos formados, porque como repito, ellos no nos querían reconocer porque la mayoría hablábamos español en el edificio. Eso era como que a ellos nos defendían y que no, con ustedes no. Entonces nos llevaban a largas. Entonces el reconocimiento de como miembros de un sindicato creo que fue lo primero que nosotros ganamos. Luego pudimos llegar a la primera negociación con Veritas, logrando negociar unas deudas que venían desde la pandemia con la mayoría de vecinos. ellos llegaron a perdonar una deuda de creo que del 70% para la mayoría de los vecinos, incluyéndonos nosotros. Y luego tuvimos otra negociación ya para que el nuevo dueño, que en este era Prado, ya el nuevo dueño, pudimos negociar mantenimientos, reparaciones en todas las áreas, tanto en apartamentos como en áreas comunes, áreas afuera, todo lo que era el edificio. Pudimos lograr eso, en muchos apartamentos logramos que repararan. Lo único que he comprado no hemos y no creo que vamos a lograr es que nos reduzcan la renta, pero lo que hemos logrado ya como fin es que con la huelga de renta, Prado sintió tanto su presión que decidió pasar su edificio a Lantros, o sea, vender su edificio a Lantros.
And I just want to highlight that as a result of the strike, Sandra and Luis's rent will go down by 25%. And to UK. So what can you tell us about UC's response to your union's housing demands, and how much of a fight are they putting up?
I first want to say, sitting between these powerhouses, they got problems coming when we go back to the table.
That's right.
So sitting across the table from them, they're telling us that they're not ready to bargain about any housing with us. They're saying it's off the table and they're not gonna do it. But we're standing strong and saying, we're gonna do it, because like I was telling you guys earlier, it's not unreachable, because they're already doing it. They telling us that, oh, we don't have a program set up for us to even bargain or anything like that. But they gave over 100, no, let me correct myself, over 1,000 CEOs and executives low interest rate housing. They gave them all these things, and they're already making over 200K. They don't need it. We need it.
Yeah.
It's too many of us living in our cars or bundling up with family members just to pay one bill, and that one bill is rent.
Yeah.
So they're pushing back, and we're definitely pushing back. So like I said, I mean, just sitting between these two ladies here just juvenated me inside. So when we fight, we win, and they got a different fight.
Chris, you helped lead the village campaign on parking fees. You're now taking Skills to Win, hosted by the Labor Center, a training series. A training series inspired by Jane McAlee's work. From these experiences, what have you learned about yourself as an organizer?
Honestly, I never saw myself as an organizer, and it took actually organizing with my community to recognize myself as one. Funny enough, I had been running for city council, serving as the City of Albine's Planning and Zoning Commissioner. I was the Graduate Assembly Student Parent Project Director, the Vice President of the Village Resident Association at University Village. But despite all those titles and formal roles, none of them gave me the leverage to push UC to the table and demand what was right for my village community. It wasn't until I started organizing with my fellow villagers that I realized where real power lies. It doesn't come from titles or positions. It's in you, in me, your neighbors, your colleagues, and collectively acting together. As of today, I no longer hold any of those titles, and for good reason. because true and meaningful change didn't come from those roles. It came when my community and I came together, forcing UC to pay attention and take our demands seriously. We built collective power through organizing, and that's what made the difference. Through this fight, I learned what it means to harness true power, working in solidarity with my neighbors, fighting for the needs of our village, centering our demands and refusing to be ignored. Organizing has sharpened my focus and clarified what real leadership is and where power truly lies. So as someone taking the Skills to Win training, I now fully understand that power isn't handed down from formal roles, it is built from the ground up. It is the collective will of the people that drives change, and that's what brought UC to the table. Not my titles, but our united front.
Yeah.
Lee, other cities and states in the country have begun working on their own versions of the Union at Home Ordinance. The city of Berkeley has a measure on this November's ballot to create a similar set of regulations it's called Measure BB. B as in boy. If our North Star is affordable, dignified housing, especially for poor and working class people, what is the role of a Union at Home law in our plan to win?
I mean, fundamentally, the project is to make it easier for people to organize. And that was really what we sought to do with our Union at Home legislation in San Francisco. We expanded that right to leaflet in your communal space of your building. We expanded that to say, you can now knock on the doors of your building and approach tenants about joining a tenant union without fear of retaliation. You can invite tenant representatives, like folks from the Housing Rights Committee, into your building, and they can knock on doors and leaflet doors and organize tenants unions without fear of retaliation. And a lot of this is just straight out of the labor playbook, that basic protection for organizing activities. And frankly, you all are so incredibly brave for taking on these fights that terrify me. Going on a rent strike and withholding rent and the potential consequences of that, it sounds so scary. And I think what we tried to do by bringing tenants in who were going down that path is, how do we make life easier for you to do that organizing work? How do we make it less scary? And I think a lot of this does kind of come down to kind of core principles of security and avoidance of its inverse, which is fear, living in constant fear that you're going to be evicted from your home, or that you're going to be harassed by your landlord who is demanding to enter your property every week to inspect some new random issue. I mean, we were seeing the most inane forms of harassment that were targeting long-term, low-income, rent-controlled tenants to try to get them out of their buildings. And it's because companies like Veritas bought these buildings with an expected return, return on their investment. They priced their loans, and I think that they predicated the debt service on their loans on the ability to evict tenants and reset rents at market rates. And that's why they were harassing low-income tenants. So I think, our North Star has to be liberating tenants from fear of harassment and from fear of eviction, and restoring this kind of very basic ability to live our lives on a day-to-day basis without that suffocating sense of fear. I look at, again, the people who are leading these rent strikes, and you all on this stage who are leading these fights, you shouldn't have to do that every day. There's got to be some end date to that struggle, and it feels just like a constant struggle. And how do we normalize and make that policy mature in a way that tenants unions are normal and understood bases of power and countervailing sources of power to the way that capital is organizing and reorganizing all of the time to extract profit from your home, the place where you live. So I think our North Star has to be that pursuit of safety and security, and frankly liberating organizers from the constant struggle of having to fight against harassment and eviction. And there's a much bigger conversation to be had there too about the way that public resources can come to bear to support some of that organizing work, and it doesn't fall on the backs of volunteer tenants who are working long days and then coming home and with their little spare time organizing their buildings. There's a beautiful element to that, but it is exhausting, and I don't think it is sustainable long term to have volunteers leading those efforts.
To that point, Lee, and turning to you, Sandra. Sandra, in your household, you and your husband, Luis, lost hours in your job during the early years of the pandemic. Stopped an eviction attempt by Veritas, lived in poor conditions in your house until the new owner finally made repairs, all while raising your children, spending time with your family, and responding to questions from neighbors about what's happening. How have you organized your time during this period, and what do you do when you feel overwhelmed?
Pues nosotros organizamos nuestro tiempo. Fueron momentos muy difíciles durante la pandemia, después de la pandemia, y la necesidad que estábamos viviendo, deudas de alquiler, problemas en el apartamento, en el edificio, porque era en todo el edificio. Creo que la necesidad que veíamos no solo en el hogar, sino que en todo el edificio, nos hizo dar de nuestro tiempo que teníamos, organizarnos como en mi trabajo, como madre de familia, a las tareas de la casa. Entonces hicimos parte de nuestro tiempo, parte del tiempo para los vecinos, apoyarlos, ver qué podíamos hacer. Entonces nos organizamos en diferentes maneras para poder también lograr tiempo para la asociación, que es muy importante, era muy importante, es muy importante. Entonces nos organizamos. Cuando hay juntas, tomamos nuestro tiempo que podemos estar en casa descansando, o le digo yo a mi esposo, a Luis, mañana hay junta, ok, hay que hacer las cosas ahora y tenemos el tiempo para mañana. O estamos descansando y tenemos juntas, o ok, vamos a hacer esto ahora después de ir a dejar a los niños a la escuela, y haces tú esto y vamos en la tarde. Y cuando hemos tenido que a veces acompañarlos lejos, mis hijos, y bueno, tengo un hijo ya más grande, 14 años, yo los incluyo a ellos desde pequeños, más chiquitos, que entramos a la organización. Yo les decía, vamos a ir a una junta, ok mamá. Entonces es así como nos fuimos incluyendo en la organización juntos, todos, porque la necesidad era de la familia. No era por separado, éramos todos. Entonces todos apoyar, la niña a marchas y la niña iba a marchas. Incluso ahora hasta cuando tiene hambre me dice, queremos comer. Entonces creo que si queremos y tenemos el deseo de apoyarnos como vecinos, yo pienso que se pueden hacer las cosas.
And to you, Kat, right now you seek dictates the terms of the rental lease.
It's to the UC workers, but community, your family members, it takes a whole village for them to to see and open up their eyes. It takes us getting the word out there, and because it's just not this small community. This is bigger than just right here. This is California. The rent and all that is just too high. But UC is one of the largest landlords, so we got to get that out there and let them know. Pull the covers back off of them, so everybody can see what they're doing to low wages. And not even low wages, because some people make decent wages, but the rent is still to them. So it's gonna take that, it's gonna take pressure from Sacramento up at the Capitol. We always up there knocking on the doors, letting them know. So we go to the Regents meetings. You know, when they're begging, we're telling, we're telling on them. So we all just have to link arms together and make UC do the right thing. So it's, like I said in the beginning, it's gonna take people power to make them come bargain right.
Chris, through the recent campaign at the Village, you learned that you were not a UAW 4811 member, but that you could join. And so you're now a member. And you and your fellow graduate student workers have contract bargaining coming up next year for a new union contract. What do you want to see your union, you and your coworkers, do as far as UC's role as a landlord?
As a new member of UAW 4811, my top priority is for our union to secure bargaining rights over housing. Housing is one of the biggest issues we face, and UC's role as both employer and landlord gives them outsized control over our lives. To protect ourselves and our communities, we need to push the power to bargain directly on housing terms. But I also know that if UAW members come to the table and demand that UC negotiates on housing, their likely response will be no. So the real question becomes, what is it going to take to change that? This just isn't about asking UC for something. It's about showing them that we won't back down until they're forced to take us seriously. And if you can imagine that if every UAW member took a stand, not just in the workplace, but in our homes too, if we refuse to work and refuse to pay rent, we can make it clear that our labor and our housing conditions are non-negotiable. It's going to take bold action, possibly a strike that ties both housing and labor together. No rent, no labor. We have to force UC to see that they can't continue exploiting us in every aspect of our lives. Because together, we can build the leverage we need to win fair treatment as both workers and tenants.
Lee, you spoke recently at a public hearing for now board president Aaron Peskin in San Francisco. His ordinance prohibiting landlords in San Francisco from using algorithmic programs like RealPage to set rents. That ordinance plus the federal government's recent litigation against RealPage for price fixing has produced a new set of headlines in the news about the reasons for unaffordable rent. What do you make, Lee, of this shift? And what's the role of the tenant union movement in fighting companies like RealPage?
The foundation is there in San Francisco, where there is such a robust field of tenant organizations who are there to support those types of efforts. That should be the case everywhere. Even in San Francisco, I think some of our institutions are a little bit beleaguered. I regret that the pandemic has, caused a micro-generation of people to forget how to organize and the importance of being in the streets and demanding your rights. and the communal aspect of that work. But it's there in San Francisco, and we were able to pass this new law thanks to Supervisor Peskin. Do people know what RealPage is? It's a piece of software that collects data from competing landlords, including the amount of rent, occupancy levels, other lease terms. It combines that data, and then RealPage sends that data back out to the landlords and said, here's the optimal rent you should charge. Here's the optimal vacancy rate you should maintain in your building. So the effect of this, and I should say allegedly because they served me with a cease and desist letter for that presentation, but allegedly, according to their own words, they are hiking rents by double digits in geographic markets like San Francisco and across the country. In Seattle, they brag about 14% rent increases due solely to their software. In Nashville, higher in Austin, Portland, Seattle, you name it. Their presence across the country is vast. And so we were able to pass this law in just tiny little old San Francisco saying, no longer can you do that. No longer can you set high rents and maintain artificial vacancies in your buildings to suppress supply in order to maintain those high rents and to reduce availability of lower income housing. The week after we passed that legislation in San Francisco, RealPage announced a change in their business practice nationwide, that they were allowing landlords to opt out of those recommendations, which is a small but meaningful concession that we were able to get that out of San Francisco. And 2 weeks later, the Department of Justice filed a lawsuit against RealPage. It is a blistering 100-page long complaint detailing how RealPage and other companies that offer revenue management services are exploiting their power to coordinate between each other to raise rents on tenants. I forget the question, but I think the point is we need to expand rent control, which is kind of a North Star for a lot of the work that we do, and I know that people in this room are voting for Prop 33 and against 34. Oddly, we tried to various ways to pass and expand rent control in San Francisco, and one of our biggest opponents in that fight was the public employee retirement system, CalPERS, which is really cynical to think that your public pension system is the barrier to rent control. But they are also heavily invested in real estate and depend on those returns. So I think we need to, there's a lot of work to be done to break up some of these financial systems that are allowing firms to coordinate to hike rents, and even without that coordination between landlords, to oppose very reasonable policies like rent control that inure to the stability of tenants and working people like myself, like you all.
Yeah.
This is our last question. It goes to Sandra. You have accomplished a lot, Sandra, and you've been through a lot over the past 2 years. What have you learned about yourself?
Pues creo que he aprendido a tener confianza en mí misma, porque sé que puedo lograr las cosas. Sé que como inquilinas, como inquilinos, tenemos derechos, tenemos leyes que nos protegen. En el trabajo sé que también hay leyes que nos protegen. Hasta tener una seguridad en mí misma, que nadie puede sobrepasar por encima de nosotros, porque todos creo que somos seres humanos y que merecemos respeto mutuo, y que eso yo he logrado, que ahora yo soy una persona más segura de lo que hago y de lo que digo, porque sé que tengo el poder en mis manos de parar cualquier cosa que sea, porque sé que lo puedo lograr.
I want to thank our panelists. Another round of applause. workers. Thank you so much. The English department for hosting us here tonight, if anyone in the English department is here. And this is a QR code, as we mentioned, on the ballot in November in Berkeley is a version of the Union at Home Ordinance, Measure BEP, UAW 4811, which I'm a member of for the next 3 months until my residency ends, is organizing canvasses to get out the vote. There's a competing measure on the ballot from the real estate industry. Classic strategy. So, take some time, volunteer. And I just want to, I'm just really happy and glad that you all came out tonight. And we will have a recording of this that we'll send out. And it was wonderful to hold this space with you all tonight. My partner and I have to go finish packing a pod. But, and then we're leaving on Sunday for Cincinnati, Ohio to continue the work. And thank you all.
Thank you.
And please form a single file line against that wall to return your headsets. Thank you.